Again. So the name of the organization was the Rhizome Collective, and we got the name rhizome. It's a botanical term, which is a root-like structure that a number of plants have. Bamboo, for instance, is a rhizomatic plant, and it has an underground network of roots that are all interconnected with one another. And you may have an individual bamboo plant growing up here, another one here, another one here, although they're all interlinked underground and are actually the same plant. This was a metaphor for us for social networking in ways. It had both literal and figurative meaning. We would imagine ourselves as being an underground network of interlinked organizations, and you may have an autonomous organization here and one here, yet they're still connected at the base level. It's also difficult. Rhizomes, particularly bamboo rhizomes, are particularly known for being difficult to uproot. So we took it that far as well. It's an idea. It's a concept was used by a number of philosophers, radical philosophers, Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. They're French philosophers who would talk often about rhizomatic networks, and I used to, when I was in college, I read them, their philosophy, a number of times, anti-capitalism, anti-Oedipus and capitalism, Thousand Plateaus, capitalism and schizophrenia, and you know, sort of always had that concept in the back of my brain, but then here saw an opportunity, well, like, we can take this meaning, but it also has literal meaning as well. So, I mean, in a way, sort of a synthesis of theory and practice as well, you know, was where we got rhizome from. A lot of the ideas behind these ecological systems that we're developing were inspired by something called permaculture, which is a design philosophy, a way of creating long-lasting, sustainable human societies that draws on everything as diverse as modern sciences to traditional knowledge. In a nutshell, what it's about to me is about creating intensely cultivated systems that are capable of providing for as many of our own human needs as possible in as small of a space as possible. In that regard, cities are ideal because they already are so intensely cultivated. And there's a lot of existing infrastructure here, whether it's old warehouses or buildings, parking lots, rooftops, that with time and energy and love can be converted so that they're capable of providing for us with many of our own needs. But why urban space? I mean, well, currently more than 50% of the world's population is living in urban areas, and that number is growing. In the upcoming decades, we're going to be seriously challenged by the converging trends of what are called the twin hydrocarbon evils, climate change and energy depletion, also known as peak oil. And it's going to, you know, how that's all going to play out exactly, it's difficult to predict. But what we do know for certain is that we're going to have to make a rapid and urgent transition into being a culture, a community that consumes drastically less and is capable of providing for many of its own needs. We are going to be forced to relocalize economic processes back into places where people live, which right now happens to be cities. The least of which not being food. It's, yeah, we're going to have to be growing food in cities and the near vicinities of cities. I mean, the way we grow food right now is ridiculous. System of mechanized agriculture, where we are dependent on massive amounts of cheap petroleum energy to grow food, everything from planting seeds to applications of fertilizer and pesticides, irrigation, let alone distribution, where we're putting this stuff into trucks and transporting it across continents to cities in northern regions for people to eat. As fuel prices begin to go up, as they inevitably will, as we come up against genuine supply and demand issues with petroleum, it's going to be absolutely necessary that we are growing food where people are. Cities, again, are a great place to do this. Vacant lots, rooftops, there's a lot of spaces. I mean, think about just how much space is dedicated to the exclusive use of the automobile in the city. If we were to take a portion of that and tear it up and turn it into fertile growing space, we could be growing a considerable amount of calories right here. This is something that takes a bit of time and energy. Building soil. Soil is built very slowly through natural processes, but we can greatly speed up that process by composting, by taking organic waste and turning it into soil. This is something that's also really important. I mean, we need to be diverting these enormous quantities of organic waste matter that's going into the landfills every day, where it's just getting buried, taking up landfill space, and producing methane gas, which is 20 times more potent pound per pound than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. That's exactly the stuff we need to be intercepting, whether it's food or wood chips or leaves or grass clippings, turning it all into dirt, building up the soil, building up soil fertility in our cities to make gardens that are going to feed the future populations, urban populations. Also particularly important for soil health. I mean, cities have really poor soil quality in terms of just contamination as consequences of industrial processes, everything from lead paint flaking off the sides of buildings to lead from auto exhaust, smelters, burnt batteries, you name it. It's in our soils, and when we are just exposed to that incidentally, or when we eat food that is grown in it, the potential exists to pass those contaminants onto our bodies and make them sick. Building up healthy soil can help to remediate that problem by not only binding up metals, particularly heavy metals, highly lipophilic, they like to bind in the organic structure of compost, but also providing habitat for microorganisms that can help in the degradation of contaminants that are in the soil as well. It all ties together. Very important to do. Gardens, very very basic, a thing that we need much more of. Just producing annual crops. At the warehouse, we had a number of demonstration gardens that we made in what was formerly an asphalt parking lot. We didn't really set out with the intention of growing all of our food. Our space to human ratio was quite low. So I don't think we really had the potential to be growing that much of a significant percentage of how much food we actually ate. It was more there for demonstration purposes, to show that it is possible. And imagine if we took this and scaled it up. Yeah, we could be growing a lot of our food here. And that's not necessarily the goal. We don't have to be growing all of our food, but just, if we just started with some, that would be huge. That would be significant. Hugely more significant than what we're doing right now, which is barely any. Water, again, is an important thing, critical for our own sustenance. I mean, we can go for many months without food, but barely a few without water. It's taken for granted much more often because it does in fact fall from the sky, unlike food. But in dry regions like Texas and many other places, it's often many months before it rains, and as climate chaos is coming in, unpredictable weather and climate cycles as a consequence of global change is occurring, we're going to have to design for resiliency, not only in arid regions, but also in wetter regions like this, because we don't know how things are going to go. Having rainwater collection systems is a very important part of that, where we can be catching the water that falls off our roofs and storing it, having it available for dry periods. An important part of any disaster preparation plan in a city as well. Again, getting off the water grid was sort of a distant goal of ours. We certainly had the potential as far as roof space. We didn't really have enough containers to store all that water when it did come. Waste management is very important. Again, composting all our food waste for sure. We really encourage people to have worm boxes. Great thing for people who live in cities to do, who don't have access to space. That's the thing. You don't necessarily have to have access to space. You don't have to be part of a garden or CSA in order to begin practicing sustainability or self-reliance. You can have just a worm box in your kitchen, which contains a type of worm called the red wiggler that eats your food waste and turns it into an incredibly valuable fertilizer. That's something that anyone could start doing. Doesn't smell, doesn't take up a lot of space. Energy production also is important. People put a lot of emphasis on energy when they think about energy depletion and climate change. The first questions that come up are like, well, how are we going to keep driving? How are we going to keep watching TV? People don't think about how are we going to keep eating, which they don't realize how energy intensive that is. I mean, that we just make the direct connection between gas and our cars. We don't think about gas and food. But nonetheless, yeah, energy production is there. We want to be looking at how can we produce electricity sustainably and ideally on a decentralized level as well. One of the big things that we advocate is autonomous energy, which are types of energy sources where the means of extraction, refinement, and distribution are put into the hands of the people who are actually using that technology, versus highly monopolized and centralized means of energy production like coal, nuclear, natural gas. We are more excited about passive solar technologies or small-scale wind turbines, small-scale production of biofuels, biogas, human power, really trying to put an emphasis on those as well.